Hey everybody, welcome back to Good Marketing with Stephanie. Recently on the show, we've talked a lot about industries that are stuck in the past, right? But what about brands that are actually shaping the future? Today, I'm joined by a very special guest. Her name is Sophie Buonassisi. She is the Senior Vice President of Marketing at an early stage venture capital firm, GTMfund, and media brand GTMnow. She leads community and events at GTMfund and drives strategy and operations at GTMnow, where she also writes the newsletter and hosts the GTMnow podcast. Sophie works on the front lines of the startups that will ultimately shape the way we work, learn, shop, interact, championing founders who have big ideas and a bold vision for the future. As a result, she keeps a keen eye on shifts in the world of marketing that you and I, all of us, need to pay attention to. So today, Sophie and I are going to talk about how the structure of marketing teams and the work of marketers has changed, especially, with our favorite topic here, AI. We'll also dive into what the new talent profile of marketers looks like. That's what I'm super excited to talk more about, what the essential skills and competencies are that tomorrow's marketers are going to need to have. So we have a great conversation ahead of us today. Thank you so much for joining us, Sophie. Let's get into it. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Stephanie. What an intro. It's an honor to be here. Super excited and looking forward to this conversation.
Amazing. So the first thing I like to start with on every episode where we have an awesome guest like you is for you to tell us your marketing origin story. Where did you start? How did you get to where you are now? And what are you doing in your day-to-day?
Yeah, similar to many marketers, I have an untraditional route in that I did not come from an academic marketing background. It's very common in marketing, and a big part of it boils down to it's human psychology at the core, and it's also everywhere. Everyone inadvertently absorbs marketing and also creates marketing. And so it's something that you get exposed to, which is really unique because some professions you don't get that direct exposure to, but you do, whether you want it or not, get exposed to marketing. And so because of that exposure, you can understand whether you have that natural magnetism to the space, which is something that I did. And it was always one of the core areas that I was interested in because ultimately I'm very passionate about education. I think the world is created based on perception. And how do you actually create perception? It's a communication. And marketing is that communication bridge between something, whether it's a product, a service, a thought about the world, and people on the other side. And so ultimately, what are we doing when we're marketing? We're educating. So that's really where the passion derived from. And then related to background, studied very different kind of topics around criminology, really enjoyed it, was deep in kind of the tech business space locally in Vancouver. And so really married all the spaces that I was working across. And I think of it as a triangulation between all of my passions, which one is education, and media is a form of education, technology, so working directly with startups, and then community. And now through GTMfund, we do have a community of over 350 operators. And so I'm sitting at the triangulation of three deep, deep passions of mine, and couldn't be more excited and energized every day to be able to be right in the middle of those three.
That's amazing. And that's the goal, right? Every day coming to work and being excited about what you're doing. And I love the way that you, that connection that you, or maybe philosophy is a better word about marketing ultimately being a form of education. And that's so true, right? That is what we're doing every day, whether it is educating people on our products or our services, or educating them about, who we are, right? Because on the communications and PR side, a lot of it is telling that story behind the company and educating those different stakeholder groups on that story. So I really like the way that you frame that conversation. And, I would love for you to tell us a little bit more about GTMfund as well as GTMnow. How did you get started with GTMfund? What did that evolution of GTMnow look like? Just tell our listeners a little bit more about, what those two sort of entities are and how you got started there and how you got to where you are now.
You bet. You bet. So GTMfund, we're an early stage venture firm. We are investing in B2B software companies. Generalists under that, we spend a lot of time in the infrastructure space, the vertical space, the AI native space, of course. But overall, really looking at how can we back and support the best in breed software founders. And so we're working at the early stages, pre-seed, seed, predominantly some Series A's too. And that's the core of what we do. But we think of what we do almost as a flywheel. And so while we have the fund, we also have these other components, and GTMnow is one of them. So one of them is media, GTMnow, and then the other is community. And so media, I'll start with community actually, because media is a bit of a longer story that we're going to go deeper on. But community is, we're very fortunate to have, like I mentioned, around 350 or so go-to-market leaders that are part of the community. And how that started was really at the core when the fund started. It started off as a rolling fund with about 60 of our LP operator or just go-to-market operator friends, with a hypothesis of if we pool together capital and deploy it towards startups, can we disproportionately support their rate of success by supporting go-to-market? And that was the kind of idea. And the 10,000-foot view kind of backstory and why this matters is it does come full circle is our general partner, his name is Max Altschuler. He'd founded a media company called Sales Hacker back in the day. He was the 8th employee at Udemy, went on to start the first couple SaaStr annuals before that. And then once he started the media company, that really took off, took a life of its own. It was kind of like the living, breathing encyclopedia of B2B SaaS. And he scaled it over 10 years, sold it to the software company Outreach in 2018, and joined Outreach. But when he was there, his way of diversifying financially was angel investing, and has an incredible track record. So what happened was all these operators he met through the media company would see his track record and go, how are you doing that? How can you help me do that? And so this was always this kind of back pocket idea of like, people want diversification beyond their individual role, because what happens is you can have the best CMO, and that best CMO might be at a startup that doesn't materialize. Whereas another great CMO is at a company that turns into the next Salesforce. And oftentimes, like, there's just a numbers game, kind of luck of the draw to it. And is it representative of their ability? Oftentimes not. So you want that kind of diversification. So that was one side of it. The other side is tech moats are declining. And so as they're declining, what is that differentiator that enables companies to win? It's a go-to-market. Sales, marketing, customer success, operations behind that. That's the new differentiator. And so the hypothesis on that side was, do founders want go-to-market support? And two kind of sides to the hypothesis, both went gangbusters, both kind of blew up. And so that led to not only a $22 million fund one, but a $54 million oversubscribed fund two, and further kind of from there now that we're finished deploying out of fund two. So that was like the background kind of infancy story to it. It comes very full circle in that GTMnow is actually something that we started with the fund. So we always started a newsletter, a podcast, because we saw the power of media firsthand from Sales Hacker. But in 2023, the opportunity to actually buy Sales Hacker back from Outreach opportunistically came up. Maybe it was fate. I don't know. Crazy. These kind of things never happen, but it did. And it made sense. So we actually bought Sales Hacker back and rolled it under GTMnow and relaunched that brand as GTMnow. So while we've always had media as a pillar from the beginning, it really took off a life of its own in 2023, which is when that acquisition took place. So now kind of come full circle. It's top 1% podcast, over 50,000 subscribers on newsletter, and we're really kind of doubling down and investing into it. So that's a big part of the pillar, in addition to a community of incredible go-to-market operators that span the different go-to-market functions.
I love it. It's such an interesting story. And I want to zoom in on just one particular piece of that, which is that for so many of these tech startups, right, the marketing piece is a big differentiator. And having come from SEMrush, right, was recently acquired by Adobe. You may have heard of Adobe before, probably have heard of SEMrush, but it just kind of that sort of Cinderella story for them, right? Going from having been a startup at one point to now being they were a public company, and now they've been acquired by one of the largest, in the space. So, and the reason I bring that up is because a big part of SEMrush that made it stand out or made it better or bigger than its competitors was its marketing, right? Like the marketing function is absolutely enormous at SEMrush when I worked there on the PR team. So is such a key point here, that marketing piece really leads the way. And I think that is a good transition into the rest of our conversation. When I did the intro, right, I mentioned that recently on the podcast, I have talked with guests about like industries that are more like old school or sort of reactive or are resistant to change. But these companies that you work with, right, at GTMfund, and that you support through GTMnow, like these are the companies that are the trendsetters in marketing. They are the change makers in marketing. So I would love to hear from your perspective, from when you started out in the marketing space and with GTMfund to now. What did marketing look like when you first started, and how has it changed since you first came, onto the scene in marketing? Would love to just hear your thoughts on that, and really what that evolution has looked like from your perspective.
Excellent question, because it sure has changed dramatically. Even, as few as 5 years ago, it was still very, very common for marketing teams to actually measure based on top of funnel. And I spent many years ago in the conversion optimization space, full funnel, working across every single conversion point, think from top of the website through to closed one, and broaching into kind of retention and renewal. And a lot of teams measured at the top of the funnel still. And so when there's that disconnect and silo, and somebody's gauging success versus based on an MQL versus a closed one versus retained revenue, the way that you operate and view the world and approach marketing is tremendously different. So that's already changed. That's been one of the biggest changers, I would say, is the measurement, the objective. And what does that mean for marketers and marketing teams? It means it's no longer part of a funnel. Like, your job is core to the functioning of the business. You are no longer kind of put in a silo. So it's really exciting. It's a really exciting shift for marketers to be ingrained in the business end to end, because that's really what marketing is. Like customer marketing, everything at every single point in the funnel involves marketing. And so that role has really evolved to be a lot more central to the business. The measurement has changed, and the work itself has evolved. Of course, we're going to get into AI. It's changed tremendously with AI. But even before that, I think the maturity of type of work was expanding. So there was a lot of different types of marketing continuously popping up, whether it be different segments of product marketing, how we think about customer marketing, and kind of juts out from that, top of funnel. So quite a variety. And now we're at this incredibly interesting intersection with AI. And I know it's sometimes can be a little bit daunting because so much is changing so quickly. But I truly believe this is one of the best times and most exciting times to be in tech and to be building and to be a marketer.
So can you tell us a little bit more about that? Like, I totally agree. This is, well, it's always an exciting time to be in marketing, but why now? Like, what is AI? What changes is AI bringing about in your perspective that makes this such an exciting time to be in this space?
The marketing function, in a way, served a role amongst many other chefs in the kitchen before. And now suddenly, marketers have the ability to grab every ingredient to actually bake the cake, which is really exciting. So right now we've evolved into a time where marketers are builders, getting highly technical. And we just hosted actually a Claude Code workshop last week in San Francisco. And it was interesting because it was really framed around founders, sales leaders, and we had quite a few marketers request to come and join. And they were actually the most technical of anyone there and ahead of the curve on utilization, because there are so many use cases that can be amplified and changed and evolved with AI for marketers, I believe, more than any other function. So at least from a variety perspective, engineering is transformative right now, but from a variety of different types of outputs, it's incomparable.
That's super interesting. And just, from the perspective of like marketing being so ingrained in the success of the business overall, and you working with founders, right? And these startup companies, like how closely do the founders work with marketing? Like, like, do they have like just one marketing leader? Do they have a marketing team? Like, what does that structure typically look like with the founders you work with? And what's their approach to marketing, right? Like, what are they looking for in their marketing teams?
So we invest at the earliest stage, pre-seed. And at that time, it's pre-marketer on the team, and then they'll evolve and end up bringing somebody on, typically in between kind of seed and Series A's when we see the most notable inflection. But we're seeing overall marketing as a function of go-to-market just being a necessity earlier and earlier and earlier. And you can see it around companies who are now leading into distribution before actually launching. So that prioritization is occurring even pre-product. Most oftentimes they're building it in silo. You build the ship while you're flying it, but it's always a priority now. And so what used to be, hey, we're going to get a great product. We're going to have design partners. We're going to test the product, iterate the product. And when we feel like we're in a little bit of a better kind of product market fit position, that's when we're going to put on the pedal for actually marketing. Completely changed. Now it's much earlier. Everybody's thinking about marketing as a cohesive part of their go-to-market strategy from the earliest pre-seed days. So that's the biggest change that we're seeing. Out of that, we're seeing a lot of founder-led marketing taking place, especially at the early stages. So whether it's owning a category, being a thought leader and voice, that is something that is arguably a priority for every single founder that we're supporting and seeing across the portfolio and ecosystem. And so that form of marketing is occurring at just the earliest days. We've got seed companies that are really leaning into PR, which traditionally companies would wait until the Series A, sometimes even Series B, to really pull on that lever. But because third-party validation is getting such tremendous traction from LLMs and from just a perception perspective, it has become a priority even earlier.
It's like such an interesting trend that you're calling out, or pattern that you're calling out. And, obviously the LLMs and AI play a role in that, but are there any other driving factors that you see behind this sort of earlier and earlier and earlier, marketing launch for these brands? When you even mentioned sometimes it can be pre-product, right? Like, so what do you see as some of the driving factors behind that?
Ultimately, it's that tech moats are declining. So through tools like anything lovable cursor, what used to be weeks, months of building and hours time spent can now be done within hours. I got off a call with somebody who'd built an incredible security product last night, for instance, and it took him 20 hours to build and probably 40 to fully QA and fledge it. And that includes a marketing website to go along with it. And it's incredible. Like, the quality is just fantastic. And so that shift has really put the spotlight on marketing and overall go-to-market, because as these tech moats decline, again, how do you win? What is your differentiator? What is your moat? It is your go-to-market strategy and execution now. And marketing is a huge, huge part of that at the earliest stage.
So then how do you see the work of marketing fitting within that umbrella, right? Of differentiation, of standing out, right? Because that's going to be a lot of it, a lot of the puzzle that has to be solved, right? Is how to stand out, how to engage with that audience, how to engage with additional investors, right? So what role does marketing play in that? What does that work look like?
The work of marketers is certainly evolving with AI. So we used to be in almost a maker role where we were responsible for creating. And now that's really changed to orchestration or architecting, for lack of a better word, where the way of thinking of a marketer is less from the pure creation one-to-one. It's much more of a systemized mindset around how can you create from a mindset of we have system, like we're building the systems for this. So that's the biggest change, is from maker to more orchestrator. We're seeing organizations go a lot more horizontal. That's one thing that's quite interesting, especially at the later stages, collapsing of those kind of traditional routes and roles. And I wouldn't be surprised if, as we progress, the entire kind of org chart around how you progress from being a specialist to a director to a CMO just entirely changes, because that progression is based on the type of work being creating and evolving that to stakeholder management. And some things are still required. Stakeholder management is one that will inevitably be required to some degree. But because the maker is changing now, that collapse is happening faster. I've seen companies that are organizing more around objectives as opposed to seniority. So more like cross-functional or like mission pods in a way, where someone's really focused on a specific part of the funnel. And that includes marketing, that includes other areas. And that is that team. So it's less siloed between function. I've also seen it where people are really orchestrating these marketing pods to be extracting one person that's more of the architect. So designing the systems, one person that's more of the creative, really thinking about it from that lens. And then any other kind of functions on top of that, but really taking one individual from each piece as opposed to having any redundancy, bundling that together, and then deploying that into the go-to-market organization wherever needed. So where we are now, that change is happening quickly across a lot of organizations. We haven't actually seen as many headcount cuts across the ecosystem in marketing as anticipated. Product marketing has been one that we have seen quite a few shifts around, but overall, we're seeing a lot of repurposing. So what happens when you can go 10x the speed? When you have 10x efficiency, what happens is you have three options. You can 10x your output and continue with that output with lesser resources. You can scale back to whatever that regular ratio is, or you can kind of slow down and everybody gets the 4-day work weeks and so forth. And we're seeing across the board, everyone leaning into option one, which is if we have the ability to actually 10x our output, we're not peeling back. We're actually doubling down. And so people are, while they're being wary of hiring, we haven't seen as many make drastic cuts as some other organizations because people are really leaning into speed at the early stage where it is everything. You need to own your category, you need to own your market, and you need to get there before anyone else.
It's so fascinating. And I want to make sure, just sort of summarizing what you just said and making sure I'm summarizing it correctly, but especially your point about the orchestration piece, right? And organizing and how marketing as a function is being reorganized around these changes in the landscape, especially for tech companies. And it's a really interesting thing to see. And I think there is a lot of there's a lot of negative media coverage and talk out there about AI and what AI is going to do to the marketing function as a whole, to jobs within the marketing function. But if I'm understanding correctly, what you're saying is not necessarily that those jobs are going away. They're just changing, and how that function actually is operationalized is changing. And I think, actually, first, let me pause and say, is that correct?
Yeah, no, you are absolutely correct. Will it continue to change where there are less specific marketing jobs? I believe, yes, absolutely. We're at this inflection point where we are in limbo. Teams are adopting AI, they're operationalizing it, but we're still in a very test environment. If you look at the procurement landscape, what happened in 2025 was we had a lot of experimentation. So companies had inflated experimental revenue. And now in 2026, what's happening is people are consolidating. We've hit the experimental stage. Now it's really about operationalizing AI utilization in companies. And that includes vendors, that includes roles. So yes, roles will absolutely get impacted. They are being impacted. I think they will be impacted 10x what they are right now. But we're at this limbo stage where we're seeing teams still trying to repurpose successfully right now as they figure out what this next era of go-to-market looks like.
Yeah. And, I think it's interesting too, from the creative side of things, because, as you were talking through that impact of AI and how marketing teams and their work are changing, for the creative in me, there's always that part that goes, no. Like, we don't want the creative aspects to be replaced by like AI, but, and I'm curious what your thoughts are on this and, what you're seeing with the companies that you're working with. But there's been a lot of coverage that's come out recently, and I talked about this on LinkedIn and Instagram, but there was another article that came out recently talking about how Netflix was offering like $775,000 salary for like a top communications person within their organization, right? Like somebody who knows how to write really, really well, somebody who knows how to do storytelling really well, who knows how to align all the stakeholder groups. So it's like at the same time, some of those more, creative roles, I mean, obviously that's like very senior level role, but still those roles for people who are creatives or people who are really, really good at creating a specific type of thing, we're actually seeing that being rewarded when at first it was like, oh, no, AI is going to eliminate all of that. So I'm just kind of curious what you think from the creative side, what the impact looks like if you are seeing, founders prioritizing the creative aspect. Like, I just would love to hear your thoughts on that piece of it.
Yeah, I mean, super fascinating to see what larger organizations are doing from a job perspective, who they're hiring. And that's a perfect example of how seniority is still prioritized. And that is what we're seeing ubiquitously overall is seniority is super helpful. People are hiring fewer people, but more senior people. And what does that mean for early stage people? It's a very, very volatile time to be at an early stage of your career. I believe one of probably the most challenging, also most exciting times out there. And I feel for everyone who's trying to enter the job force right now when things are just so incredibly, incredibly volatile. But there's a lot of things that can be done. So as people are looking to more senior individuals that have the ability to take on that orchestration role and understand and use their judgment of what looks good, because right now that's the big differentiator. You can create any kind of orchestration and agent or agentic workflows for a lot of the entry level work. That's a reality. What can you not replace? Judgment. And so to have 20 plus years of judgment accumulated in a human right now is incredibly valuable. So that value is retained. Now, if I were, a young person entering the workforce right now, what we're seeing across like where the needs are, how do you stand out? How do you actually prepare to enter the workforce right now? Getting your hands on AI. It's probably the reason I say, yes, it's one of the most challenging environments, but it's also one of the most exciting. It's never been a flatter landscape in terms of everybody has been level set for AI adoption. And so by getting hands-on, by understanding how to actually use AI, that's going to help equip people to enter the workforce better, smoother, and faster. And then what does the actual role look like when they enter? Because it used to be that the entry-level roles were a lot more manual oriented, perhaps. But those are quickly changing and being eliminated and replaced with agentic workflows. So what does it actually look like? What is that skill set the junior marketers need? Well, we'll see. But I believe one of the big ones is going to be systems thinking. So when you come in and you have a certain, for example, area of focus that you're placed on, to be able to systematize it and think about it and orchestrate that small piece of the puzzle enables you to kind of grow the puzzle, build the puzzle, and then become a larger kind of orchestrator for it. So any kind of AI workflow, it's changing how people are hiring, the type of skill sets people need. But that's one of the big one is we're seeing that gap between seniority and entry really pulling apart. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, it's a great point that you make. And I think, I would love to just kind of talk through an example of what that could look like. So if someone is listening to this that's early in their career or is in college and is having those questions of what are the skills and competencies I need going into my career, or if I want to advance in my career, right? Because at some point, I want to be that person with 20 years of judgment and experience, right? That's the leader in the room. And how do I get there if all of this is changing, right? So I think a good example, and correct me if I'm wrong, of kind of this whole sort of reorientation of the marketing function as a whole that you're talking about could be, for example, if we switch to an objective-based approach for, let's say, like sustainability communications or something like that. Like, so let's say it's in the corporate comms space and we're focused on ESG investing, something like that. So if you're an entry level person coming in and your role is help support sustainability, communications, and support investment from ESG or investors, right, in your company. It could be, all right, well, if I want to like systematize those communications, it could be, all right, we're releasing, I don't know, a new product or something that has these sustainable attributes. So these are the different pieces of that communications puzzle that I need to support. These are all the things that need to be created. This is how we're going to track that workflow, and then automating a lot of that. So all of the different information collection and research, approvals, right, and reviews, actual distribution, measurement, and reporting. These are the kinds of systems that we can put together as someone who is younger in your career without needing that 20 years of experience. You know what I'm saying? And I hope that is a good example, and would love to hear your thoughts on that as well. But I think that's just one way that, you can apply a systems-based approach to marketing or communications, but still be creative as well in how you're doing that. So would love to hear your thoughts.
100%. Yeah, 100% agree. It's almost, and not to take away the marketing term, but it's almost shifting anyone in a junior marketing role entering to more of a RevOps function with the marketing lens. And so you have that domain functional expertise of marketing, but you're approaching it in essence as a RevOps problem. And that's kind of how I see that example that you shared, and how I anticipate, we'll see how it all plays out, but how I anticipate entry-level roles evolving.
Which is so interesting. And, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on where, any good resources, maybe through GTMnow, right? Any good resources on that way of thinking and that approach to marketing that listeners of this podcast could access to learn a little bit more about how to kind of shift towards that systematized way of thinking.
We're working on a piece on systemized thinking right now, actually. So it'll be published in a few weeks here.
Well, awesome. That's great. Well, we'll definitely want to share that in the show notes and, beyond when that comes out. So definitely keep us posted. But, Sophie, I think that we are going to have to wrap it up. It's been such a great conversation. But before we sign off, I just wanted to ask, is there anything else that you wanted to add here to the conversation? Anything else that really has stood out to you recently in the marketing world that you think our listeners should know?
Thank you, Stephanie. I mean, I appreciate you putting these together, because right now, when things are shifting so quickly, it's these kind of live conversations that are the most valuable, because they're real time. They're real-time updates. By the time something is published, it's often too late. Whereas conversations like this give you a bit of a look under the hood to how the role is evolving, how organizations are evolving, and accordingly, how you can be successful in the role. So appreciate you putting all these together. And then just a final piece of advice for marketers is really lean into AI. It's a really exciting time to build. And there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of fear and worry, because if you go on socials, it looks like everybody is insanely advanced with AI. And if you are not there, do not worry. Take it one step at a time. Think of it as a maturity curve, your personal AI maturity curve, and just go one step after another. And eventually you'll be at the top of the staircase looking at the next floor of stairs. But that's how it happens gradually, because there's just an abundance of information right now, and it will continue to just grow.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Sophie, before we sign off here, would love for you to tell us where Friends of Good Marketing with Stephanie can find you on social media. And we will also link in the show notes to your profiles.
Yeah, I appreciate it. LinkedIn and X are both great channels. So either of those work great. Sophie Buonassisi on LinkedIn, Sophie Buona on X. And then there's a weekly newsletter and podcast too. So they can all be found under GTMnow.com.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes, make sure you go and subscribe to the GTMnow newsletter so you can stay connected with Sophie and the GTMnow media brand and all the amazing stuff they're putting out, including this upcoming piece on systematized thinking, which you will want to know here moving forward into our very AI optimized marketing world that we are all living in. So, but thank you so much again, Sophie, for joining us today on the podcast. We really loved having you. And for everyone listening, until next time, if you learned something new or you heard an idea that lit a spark or inspired you in some way, please do subscribe, rate the podcast, and share our podcast with your friends. And until next time, thank you so much, Sophie. And this has been Good Marketing with Stephanie.
Awesome. Thank you, Stephanie.